So now that we've got that sorted, we're not going to run into any errors later on in our program. Update count doesn't need to take anything for now, but we need to make user IP global for this function. The first function we're going to be working on is the update count, because this is probably the most simplest. All we need to do is run a function to grab the value, or a query rather, to grab the value from the database. We then need to grab this or add one to this and then insert it into the database, or update the count field. So let's go back to hits count so we can work with this. So count at the moment is equal to 0. So the first thing we're going to focus on doing is grabbing this value. So let's create a query, and it's just text for now. We're going to run the query in a moment so we can see if the query's worked or not. So I'm going to say select count from hits count. That's it. So let's put these in with apostrophes around them so we can see it better. So now we can run the query. So query run equals MySQL query. Remember, we're using this function and we're just putting the text that we've defined our query up here. So this query should work because we know that it's working. So let's run the page. Let's first of all call this function. Okay, let's go back to our page and see if we have any errors. Okay, we don't, but I want to make sure we don't run into any errors, so I want to say if, and I'm going to enclose this in brackets, then we continue. Okay, if not, we want to say die, and we want to say, in fact, we won't use die because this can sometimes interfere with the template of your website. For example, if you were including this at the top of your website, you're not going to want to kill the rest of the page just because the query is not working. So for now, we're going to leave this out. At the moment, we've just got an if statement. We haven't got an if else statement. So all we're doing is we're saying if this query works, then run it. Otherwise, just be silent. We're not going to say anything to the user. But we could test it for now, I suppose, and we could say die, and then we can put MySQL error in there. And this is a great method for debugging as well. If you're not sure about your queries and you want to add this in for now, let's say you were to add, say, an extra comma in there or something, and to refresh, you get the error back. But like I said before, if we get rid of this and then we put an and just before this, an at sign, sorry, just before this, and we refresh, we don't get an error back. We're just silent about it. So let's get rid of that now. So presuming our query has run, we've checked that our query's run, we need to get the value returned from this query. And we can do this using the MySQL result function. So I'm going to say count equals MySQL result. Now there's a few arguments we need to pass through to this. The first one is the query that's been run, so that's query run. And the second one is the row that we want to receive, get the value from. Now obviously we've only got one row and we're only ever going to have one row. We're not inserting more than one row, we're just updating this single row here. So remember, this is the row here and this is the field name down here, the column. So row and column. So we've got count equal to 0 at the moment. It's on the 0 row, so the first row is the 0 row because remember we start at 0 when we're counting. So we've got 0, so we type 0 in there. And lastly, we need to specify the field name, which is count. So I can just write count in there. So now the value count, this here, is equal to 0. So let's echo count out to see what happens. So update count function's now going to give us a 0 back. So let's just change this inside of our database to make sure that everything's working. Let's just give this a value of, say, 21. We can go back to our page, refresh, and we get this value back. So we know that everything's working properly. Let's just change this back to 0. Click go. Okay, so back to 0. Now that we've got this count variable, we can create a new variable called count inc, and that is going to be equal to count plus 1. Otherwise, we could say count plus plus, but for now, I just want to create a new variable to keep things simple. So count inc equals count plus 1. So now what we've got is we've got the original value, which is 0. Ooh, let me just click back to here. We've got the original value, which is equal to 0. Then we've got the new value, which is equal to 1 now, because our original value is 0. So now what we need to do inside here is perform another query to update this value. So again, we say query. You can say query to or query update equals. So we're saying update count. Oh no, sorry, we're saying update hits count set count equal to and this is just going to be our count inc value, so count inc. So we can also enclose this in single quotation marks. So update hits count, to update this table, that's not enough information. Now we need to say what we want to set. So we're setting count, which is equal to, let's just go down this here, set this value to count inc, which is now equal to 1 because we've refreshed. So now we can run this query. So query update run equals MySQL query. Remember, we require this function to actually process our query. So just doing this isn't enough. So and that is query update. And now we can use exactly the same structure here, and we can say if, and enclose this in brackets, if query update run equals, so if that runs, then we're going to echo out OK for now, but we don't actually need to do that. So I mean, eventually we're not going to need this if statement. We just need the query update, and we can put an @ sign in front of it. But for our purposes now, we're going to check if this query has been successfully executed. So let's go back to our table and back here, so we know that we're definitely on 0. So our count is on 0 at the moment. Now, with everything I've explained, this should, when we refresh the page, call this function. We're calling the update count function down here, and it should update the value and increment it by 1. So let's refresh, and we've got an OK value back here. Let's go back to PHP My Admin and click browse, and you can now see that count is equal to 1.